So what if the most dangerous moment in implementing an innovation isn't the first failure, but rather the moment you quietly decide, yeah, that failure cost is acceptable to keeping this innovation? Because once we do that, we do something really important. We don't eliminate the risk, we normalize it. Now, that idea matters a lot right now, especially if you're a marketer being told daily, hourly, by the minute that this time, this whole agentic AI thing, well, it's the future, and it's finally arrived, and it's powered, by the way, by an autonomous robot. What's the cost of failing in that? So in the mid-1800s, railroads were the miracle technology of their time. Faster travel, more commerce, a world suddenly stitched together by steel and steam. It felt unstoppable, inevitable, and it was also, as you might expect, incredibly dangerous. Rail work became one of the deadliest jobs in the United States. And when more than 500 people died in a single year from railroad-related accidents in 1890, well, the public was horrified. There were hearings, outrage, a rallying cry to do something and do something now. Well, now, cut to present day, 136 years later. We've had massive advances in railroad engineering, safety standards, and regulation, and railroad deaths have, well, hovered between 700 and 900 people per year. Now, on paper, that looks like progress, right? Basically, we learned how to scale railroads properly. But if you think about it, in practice, well, it reveals something even more interesting. We didn't eliminate the danger of railroads. We just agreed to live with it at a certain level. And that's the hardest thing to see in the early moments of real innovation. Not whether there will be a cost, but at which point the cost eventually starts to feel normal. Philosopher Paul Virilio had a phrase for this. He said, every innovation invents its own disaster. In other words, when you invent the ship, you simultaneously invent the shipwreck. The airplane invents the plane crash. And now some of these, well, like railroads and planes and skyscrapers and highways, they're pretty obvious in the disasters that they create. Others, not so much. Social media, for example. I think we're just now realizing some of the invented disasters that social media brought with it. But ultimately, the point in any innovation is that progress, as any innovation ages, doesn't remove risk. It formalizes it. So what does any of this have to do with marketing? Well, in a part 1 of my 4-part series this month on Agentic AI, I began to explore the promise and the reality of Agentic AI in marketing. How do we get ready to be ready? What's the right way to acknowledge that the cost, the disaster, is inevitable as we deploy the innovation of Agentic AI in our marketing strategy? And why doing some of the most boring stuff up front might be the best way that we can actually recognize what that normalized cost should or could be. So welcome to part 1 of my 4-part series this month on Agentic AI, and where I begin to explore the promise and the reality of Agentic AI in marketing. How do we get ready to be ready for it? What's the right way to acknowledge that the cost, the disaster, is inevitable as we deploy the innovation that is called Agentic AI into our marketing? And why doing some of the most boring stuff up front might be the way that we can actually recognize what the normalized cost should or could be. So you've heard the promise. Very soon, Agentic AI will plan campaigns, orchestrate journeys, manage channels, optimize spend, coordinate workflows. Marketing will finally stop feeling like herding cats on a sailboat and start feeling like you're running the Starship Enterprise. And if you talk to vendors, especially those who have to justify a metric ton of investment, well, it all sounds effortless. But if you talk to the actual marketing leaders, the people accountable for budgets and brands and compliance and the teams, you hear something a bit more honest. Yeah, there's excitement. Yes, there's curiosity, but there's also a tightening feeling in the chest that says something here doesn't quite add up. Why? Because the promise of the innovation creates pressure, and that pressure is racing ahead of the practice. Now, before we can talk about whether Agentic AI is good or bad, we need to be clear about what it actually is, not in some TED Talk language, but in some real, messy, modern marketing terms. Here's an operational definition that I've been using. Agentic AI systems are autonomous programs that can plan, reason, and take action toward complex goals with minimal human intervention, behaving less like passive tools and more like proactive digital coworkers. Now, in theory, that means they can pursue our marketing goals across multiple steps, multiple systems, and take action in real workflows. They can maintain context over time and operate within a defined boundary of authority. And that last part, that last sentence, that sentence about operating within a defined boundary, it's doing a whole heck of a lot of work. You see, there's a massive difference between a prompt of draft an email and show it to me so I might send it to figure out the audience, generate the message, schedule the send, test variants, optimize based on results, and report outcomes. Both use AI. One is agentic, and only one introduces the real operational risk here. Now, of course, it feels similar, right? Marketing automation certainly isn't new. We've had rules engines and workflows and automated workflows and CMS approvals and personalization and alerts for, 20 years. What's different is that agentic systems combine four things that rarely lived together before: reasoning, memory, tool use, and delegated authority. It's that combination that collapses multiple human roles into a single execution loop. And there's no doubt that it's going to be quite powerful. But it's also why experienced leaders get a little nervous when we have that pit in our stomach when somebody says, "Don't worry, it's fully autonomous." Because agentic systems don't just suggest, they actually act. And the moment a system can act across tools over time through a chain of decisions, one uncomfortable question shows up. Who's accountable when it goes wrong? When disaster inevitably comes, when the cost finally reveals itself. You see, in my 30 years of marketing, I've learned that marketing failures almost never happen because teams lack intelligence or ideas. They happen because governance is unclear, strategy is fuzzy, alignment is assumed instead of designed. And here's the problem: agentic AI doesn't fix any of that. It doesn't fix unclear strategy, it simply scales it. It doesn't resolve organizational confusion, it operationalizes it, and it doesn't create alignment, it assumes that alignment already exists. That's why deploying agentic AI doesn't feel like a feature upgrade to marketing automation, but it rather feels like a governance test. Credible research, by the way, are already waving a yellow flag to warn about this. Gartner, for example, predicts that more than 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027, not because the demos fail, but because the costs rise, risks surface, and the business case never quite holds to the promise. Which brings me to the question I keep hearing and asking myself, well, really since the middle of last year when AI and agentic AI started to become a thing, why do we have to implement AI? I mean, really, it seems like a weird question, but why wouldn't you implement AI, right? But what's the mandate? Why do we have to do it? We got along fine without it before, and funny enough, a lot of the answers I get when I ask that question are wrapped in productivity and innovation talk. But underneath, there's fear. There's fear and guilt. If we don't, we'll fall behind. If we don't, we're not doing enough. If we don't, our competitors will. And any of those might be true, but there's still terrible reasons to make a strategic decision. Any strategic decision, much less one that is as unknown as a new innovation like agentic AI. Marketing has always lived at the intersection of science and art, data and judgment. And every major decision doesn't just introduce something new. Remember, it introduced the cost, the disaster of the thing. Invention never arrives alone. It brings the accident, the disaster with it. And you see, the most dangerous moment isn't the first failure we have. It's the moment that we stop admitting what the cost really is or could be, the minute we don't acknowledge it. That's why adopting agentic AI out of fear is so risky. It replaces judgment with belief. It assumes autonomy is inherently good, that more AI means better marketing with fewer humans, and that the only cost is software licensing and skills training. But marketing doesn't just need religious belief. It needs discernment and judgment. Agentic systems may create competitive advantage, but only when authority is earned by the teams that they serve. The workflows and the governance, they need to be designed by humans first, and teams are explicit and must be explicit about where they remain human. That's leadership in AI, or honestly, any innovation. Remember, if this is that important, if agentic AI is this important, if agentic AI really is one of the most important innovations that hits marketing since the internet, which is now how it's being pitched, well, then this isn't than when it's logical for what you're just building today. No, we have to think about the fact that we're building something that needs to survive the hype, needs to resist the theater of the vaporware features of technology, and we need to build lasting, durable value while acknowledging that there will be a real cost in the invention itself. So no, you shouldn't forget about agentic AI. It's coming. It's real. It is real. Structural shifts are happening. Agents are being embedded into enterprise platforms. Tool connectivity is improving. Marketing systems are becoming agent addressable by default. Exploring it makes sense. Just we can't pretend that it's free or that there won't be a disaster along the way. So come back next week for part 2. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through a practical framework for separating durable value from agentic AI theater before you normalize a cost you didn't mean to accept. And in the meantime, remember, it's your story. Tell it well. I'll see you next week.